Welcome to what will be my first YouTube video. What I wanted to use this channel for is to kind of discuss things around my own training, my thoughts and feelings about training as a coach, and then sort of to showcase or look at some of the preparation for training for some of the events I enter, how I sort of train, and what I do to prepare myself kind of mentally, physically for them. I think kind of broadly, what I suppose I term it as is kind of adventure endurance. It's kind of a made up term, but it's kind of taking things like ideas around like hybrid training, training for kind of ultra endurance, strength training in the gym, and then kind of just combining that into what is effectively a physical preparation program for adventure and endurance sport. I think that's quite broad. For me, it certainly ends up being quite broad in terms of I've done cycling events, I've done ultra running events, I've done sort of hiking, climbing, swimming, triathlons, all sorts of different events that kind of fall within that idea of outdoor adventure, I suppose. And then in the strength side of things as well, I do a lot of Olympic weightlifting, a lot of kind of more traditional strength training, which sits separate to that adventure endurance. That's kind of where that hybrid idea comes in. It's kind of an overused maybe term, hybrid training, because it's something that is probably become much more popular in the last sort of probably 5 years, with the rise of CrossFit in part, but also things like Hyrox, and then people who are just terming themselves as hybrid athletes, kind of a do-it-all strength endurance, and a lot of people sort of have very specific kind of avenues of that, so that they pursue like powerlifting and running marathons, for example. Others are kind of keep it very much more broad, in a sense of they just do general strength training, and then they kind of do endurance training on the side of that as well, in various capacities. And they might sign up for specific events, or they might have kind of specific goals. There's some people as well who have kind of taken it down the avenue of doing kind of hybrid type challenges. So choosing a set of metrics, maybe squats, maybe pull-ups, maybe something like that as a kind of strength exercise, and then like a sub 4 hour marathon or a sub 20 minute 5k or whatever that is, and then they've kind of pursued that over a course of whatever, like 12 to 16 weeks, maybe shorter, maybe longer, and kind of pursued and see how far they can push it. And then there's other individuals who kind of push the upper end of that. Like there's a few individuals who've kind of chased kind of 500-pound squats and like sub 5 minute or sub 5 minute mile, for example, and variations on that are kind of more towards they've chosen a couple of very narrow kind of metrics and really pushed as hard as they can in two things that strength and endurance typically are seen as kind of counteracting each other. So I suppose all that is to say that I've taken the angle on this kind of hybrid training or concurrent training or strength and conditioning, whatever you want to call it, strength and endurance, and sort of my take on that, what I'm trying to do and what I want to do is to chase kind of more of that outdoor adventure side of things, which I think might on the face of it seem more like an endurance training thing, but I think in reality has elements or requires elements of training within strength training, within endurance training, and then all the kind of the specifics of actually being outdoors in those environments for potentially long periods of time, and all that goes along with that in terms of being self-sufficient and in terms of being able to be robust enough and fit enough to actually cope with the demands that are placed on you in those environments. So I think just we want to talk through a little bit around what I feel is necessary as a kind of adventure endurance athlete for these events, and it's quite broad ranging, obviously, because the term adventure could mean very different things to different people, and certainly different people will take that in very different ways. Like what the physical requirements are to run a mountain ultra race versus doing a outdoor sprint triathlon, for example, like very different demands in those sports, but in the broad sense of adventure, doing outdoor sports in that capacity. Like there's some commonalities there that I think are really important to train. So I think starting out from the strength side, and sort of I'll take my perspective on this and how I train for it, and then just some thoughts around it as well. So I think being strong when you're in the outdoors is actually really important. I think especially as you start to get into more of that kind of adventurous or ultra realm of things, being self-sufficient, for example, generally you will have to carry more kit, be that in a rucksack, be that, for example, in bags on a bike, like on the frame, or doing things where you're having to kind of go over more technical terrain will require certain kit, like climbing, for example, requires ropes, requires harnesses, requires all of the various kit to attach you to the rock face. Those things are then having more of a demand on your strength than pure endurance sport typically does. So for example, if you're just a track runner or a road runner, for example, you don't need any kit with you. Even getting into more of the kind of ultra distance or longer distance things, kind of marathons or above, like you can not carry anything beyond maybe a water bottle, or carrying sort of like a small amount of nutrition to have and fuel to have around you. But when you get into those kind of ultra distance events, generally you need to then start carrying more kit. Be that maybe in some races they have mandatory kit, so safety kit like waterproofs, for example, or spare clothes, or a certain number of calories that you have to carry with you. You then look at kind of some of the multi-day ultra events, and you might then have to be carrying sort of sleeping equipment, tents, like sleeping bag, exponentially more spare kit. And then you maybe look at like extreme environments, and you might look at maybe like doing something in the Arctic, and you then will need all the cold weather gear or gear to navigate the snow, for example, or training in the desert, you need a lot more water. So being strong, and then the implications that has on improving ability to carry load, both from a strength perspective, so actually carrying the kit is heavier, obviously, you need to be able to carry that on your back and have the physical robustness to do that, but also then having the ability to reduce the impact, I guess, of carrying that load. So VO2 max, your ability to use a maximum level of oxygen, is largely reliant on the metabolic load on your body, I suppose. So how hard your body is having to work. And if you are heavier, or if you are having to carry more kit, there will be a higher metabolic cost associated with doing the same amount of, or same output of work. So if you are having to carry 10 kilos of kit, for example, whatever the amount is, but there's a more load on your body physiologically as well as physically, which then means that you're working at probably a higher percentage of your VO2 max for a lower relative effort. So in a running context, that means that you're going slower for more effort, or going the same speed for more effort. Whereas if you are stronger, you can then decrease the total amount of your max that load represents, and so then you can make that effectively easier, more efficient, and then have yourself working at a lower percentage of VO2 max for a faster or the same speed relatively, whilst also then carrying that extra load. I think then on the physical robustness side as well, like being stronger won't prevent injuries in all cases, but what it does do is it means that your body is physically more capable of coping with the physical demands of doing these really long events, or doing events in challenging terrain, uphills, downhills, kind of mixed and varied terrain where it's not potentially flat, and also doing that then with the added load. So I think that's a key benefit of being stronger. Maybe then you look at like something like the Olympic weightlifting, which I think is a way I train. I include lots of Olympic weightlifting in my training. I don't think that necessarily is necessary. You wouldn't have to do that if you were looking to kind of move into that kind of endurance, that adventure endurance realm. But I think some of the key benefits it has is it increases your power output, makes rate of force development higher or faster, and also makes you better at controlling kind of external loads. So I think in terms of increasing power is a combination of speed and strength. Essentially, it is how fast can you apply the strength you have. which when you're moving fast through mountains, be it on a bike or be it on foot or however you're moving, becomes really important. Being able to quickly apply the strength you have means that when you're moving fast, in whatever capacity you're moving, but when you're moving fast, you're able to better utilize the strength you've built. So you're able to navigate the terrain better, you're able to cope with the physical demands of the forces that you're experiencing in these kind of challenging and slightly chaotic environments, potentially. And you can do that for longer and for longer periods of time, because you're just not getting as tired doing all these sort of demanding activities over long durations. So then in terms of like improving ability to handle external loads, obviously the Olympic lifts require you to lift the barbell really fast, but also manipulate that load. So you are pushing essentially into the floor to bring it up and then catching the bar effectively onto your shoulders or in an overhead position. And this is kind of common for all of the Olympic lifts, sort of snatch, clean and jerk. And I think the benefit that has is that you're having to manipulate and control that external load. When we then take that into an adventure sport context, like if you're on a bike, for example, you're having to manipulate and control all the forces that are coming at you through the bike, especially if that's in an off-road context as well. Potentially impact forces, hitting berms, hitting rocks, whatever, controlling the force of the bike underneath you, controlling where the bike moves at speed. All of these things require you to be able to kind of externally express force into an object or the bike, for example. And then when you're running, very similar thing. You're having to control external forces like ground impact forces, essentially where you're putting your foot, how that's affecting your body, and then controlling those forces as well. When you add then extra load on your body on top of that, so carrying food, water, kit, what we talked about before, that just exponentially increases that demand on your body in terms of the requirement for strength and power. So I think as much as the Olympic weightlifting movements are not required and not necessary, they can be a very good way to train that kind of power. And we can do the same thing with loaded jumps or plyometric type activities or just general body weight jumps and things like that. But I think the Olympic weightlifting movements are a really nice way to train for those physical qualities in a kind of really succinct way. And I think a lot of the potential issues around learning the movements can be kind of largely negated by just smart training, training with a coach or training with someone who understands how to coach these movements, and you can make really efficient progress really quickly actually when you train these things in the right way. I think then if we pivot and think about like the endurance side of things, so obviously in a lot of these kind of adventure endurance scenarios or sports or disciplines or events, the large element of it is the endurance part of it. That's the kind of obvious side of it, I suppose. It's where we are doing whatever sport, whatever event, whatever discipline that is for long durations of time in challenging environments. So whether that is ultra running, whether that is long distance biking, whether that is kayaking, whatever that might be, generally we're looking at kind of long durations of time, kind of 4, 6, 8, 12 hours and above, or potentially even multi-day events where we're having to travel through for either sort of fairly continuously for long durations or having to continually day on day do whatever distances that we're having to cover. And then adding that in obviously the challenging environments, so cold, hot, water, all sort of different environments that can potentially be included within this kind of idea of adventure endurance. Obviously having a strong aerobic base, having a strong ability to go for a long time, so endurance effectively, and then also being able to access some of those higher intensity zones or higher intensity efforts when necessary, be that climbing up hills, be that descending fast, or if that is a case of like where we're having to, maybe in a race scenario, in these events where we're having to then push beyond someone who's trying to catch us, or we are trying to win an event or push to win a stage or whatever that might be, having that kind of broad spectrum of low intensity ability just to endure for hours and days potentially, but also then have the ability to push it hard when needed. So I think looking at both of those sides, like the low intensity training is largely built through low intensity training. Like we need to be doing long, slow easy, relatively efforts. We could term this zone 2 if you want, but there are lots of different ways to train this. Generally, I look at it is you've got 2 angles to this. You've got general physical adaptations, so looking at just generally building endurance, building base level ability and base level endurance work, and that can be very general. That doesn't have to be, like, say if you're a runner, for example, that doesn't have to be always running. That could be on the bike, that could be doing some kind of form of like cross training, that could be kind of more mixed modal stuff in the gym. And then on the flip side of that, you've got then technical aspects of whatever event or adventure, endurance, challenge, whatever it might be that you're doing. So say you are doing a long distance like mountain bike ride, you obviously need to at some point be training on a mountain bike or training on the bike to improve your specific fitness for that event. So there's that side of it as well. It's kind of not skill necessarily, but the very specific endurance you're going to require in that event. So attacking it from both those angles, where we're spending some time, and maybe further away from the event, we're spending more time doing more general conditioning activities, both at that low intensity, but then also at a higher intensity. And then as we build in then towards the event and getting closer and closer, we just generally build from kind of general to specific, where we're going from those kind of real general adaptations we're looking for, where actually the application of what we're doing specifically doesn't really matter too much. It's more a case of just building a physical quality. And then as we get closer towards that event, we're then layering in more and more of the sport specific style of training, where we're including actually the thing we're going to be doing in the event. So if that is running, that has to be running. If that is biking, that has to be on the bike. And then more specifically, like say it's mountain running, for example, we need to be training probably the elevation gain, descending, those kind of skills, potentially training with all of our kit on as well, getting used to those demands. And then maybe on the bike, say it's a mountain bike event, obviously we have to be training the kind of terrain that we're going to experience during that event. So if that is technical climbs and technical descents on the bike, we need to be in training those. More maybe if it's a long distance kind of road event, we need to be doing lots of miles on the road to get used to the different demands that come from that, traveling a little bit faster, to holding much higher average speeds, and all the kind of different demands that come with different styles and different types of disciplines within adventure and within endurance. And that all leads into then building that sort of more holistic endurance capacity that is going to be able to allow us to go really long on the events where that's necessary, and then also to be able to push it hard when necessary. So if we're climbing, if we're going fast, whatever that might be, and the scenarios that come up in. I think when we then bring together that whole program or bring together that whole kind of training philosophy, I suppose, leading into our ability to do these events in kind of an adventurous endurance type capacity, I think we have to understand that strength is a really key component of that. Being strong enough to carry any extra load, being strong enough to handle the unique and challenging, chaotic, potentially demands of those adventure sports. And then also looking at the endurance capacity to actually be physically fit enough to maintain our output for whatever duration we might be having to complete that event in. Combining both of those in a way, in a program that allows us to train for that event, and then also not spending all our time in the gym training these things, for example. So yes, the strength work largely will probably take place in the gym. Yes, a portion of the endurance work may take place in the gym, but also actually we have to be out in the environments that we're going to be competing or experiencing during whatever event we might be training towards. And that's in the endurance capacity, yes, obviously, but also potentially in the strength capacity. Like we can train strength on the bike by doing high resistance work. We could train strength out in the hills, for example, by doing some kind of loaded marching or loaded like hill walking, for example. So things that are kind of like specific to the event and the training and the type of demands that are going to be placed on us in those events. Is really important. So I think having a holistic program where we're looking at all the training in the gym, all the training in our endurance capacity, and then how that translates then out into the event. And again, through a training program, we probably tend to go from that kind of more general approach into that more specific, and building through into that kind of program that allows us to be physically capable of doing these kind of challenging adventure endurance type events. So we'll leave it there for today's first video. Bit of a rant, bit of a ramble, but hopefully I'll get a little bit more concise, and we'll kind of look at some more different topics, some more kind of general topics, some more specific things around certain events, maybe ones that I'm doing or ones that I have done, or maybe just general events that I kind of see and think might be quite interesting to have a discussion around. So yeah, thanks for watching if you've made it to this point. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask below, or contact me, reach out to me on my Instagram, so Apex Delta Coaching. And then yeah, please like, subscribe, and see you next time.